What if the past you tried so hard to bury resurfaced in the most shocking way imaginable, threatening to unravel your perfectly constructed new life? Ethan adjusted his tie in the reflection of the upscale restaurant's polished window. Tonight's dinner was special, a carefully orchestrated opportunity to show Sarah, his girlfriend, just how much he valued their relationship. With a practiced smile, he walked towards their reserved table, meeting Sarah's radiant gaze across the softly lit room. She looked stunning in her sapphire blue dress. The restaurant, bathed in warm light and adorned with elegant decor, exuded exclusivity. Ethan settled into his seat, offering a smooth compliment as the sommelier poured an expensive bottle of wine. Everything felt perfect, as if life was finally clicking into place after months of uncertainty following his divorce. Sarah was the epitome of his new beginning. Sophisticated, serene, and seemingly untouched by the chaos of his past. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by easy laughter and knowing glances. Then, in an instant, everything shattered. Ethan looked up to flag down a waiter, and his eyes froze on a sight that turned his blood to ice. Standing just a few feet away was Amelia, his ex-wife. She was wearing a server's uniform, an apron barely concealing her distinctly round, pregnant belly. She was pregnant. A wave of nausea washed over Ethan. He couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up here. He remembered that after their divorce, Amelia had flatly refused any financial assistance, insisting she wanted to rebuild her life independently. But seeing her working, pregnant, in a place like this, ignited a searing pang of guilt within him. The air in the opulent dining room suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. Ethan felt his heart pound against his ribs, his hands clenching tightly under the table. What was she doing here? And why was she waiting tables in a place like this? But even more chillingly, whose child was she carrying? Sarah, completely oblivious to the emotional tempest brewing within Ethan, continued talking until she finally noticed his fixed, distant gaze. "Is everything all right, love?" she asked, her tone laced with concern, following the direction of his horrified stare. Amelia, sensing the sudden attention, quickly turned and vanished through a side door. Ethan, speechless, could only murmur something unintelligible. His mind was miles away, struggling to process the scene he had just witnessed. For the 8 months since their divorce, he had done everything possible to leave the past behind, meticulously building a life that excluded Amelia. Yet, seeing her pregnant, he couldn't help but wonder if it had happened during the final days of their marriage or shortly after. The dates didn't quite fit, and that uncertainty added a new layer of confusion to his already racing thoughts. "Do you know her?" Sarah pressed, growing more intrigued. Ethan shook his head, but his denial lacked any conviction. Sarah frowned, but didn't push further, resuming the conversation while Ethan made a strained effort to appear normal. However, his mind was trapped in a whirlwind of unanswered questions. As Sarah talked about her weekend plans, Ethan couldn't help but recall the final days of his marriage to Amelia. They had been difficult months, marked by constant arguments and an irreparable distance. She had pleaded for emotional support, but he, consumed by his work and ambition, had chosen to ignore her needs. When they finally signed the divorce papers, Ethan convinced himself it had been for the best. Now, confronting this image of a pregnant Amelia, unearthed buried guilt and doubts he desperately wished to avoid. The night dragged on, but Ethan barely touched his food. While Sarah spoke, he kept stealing furtive glances towards the side door where Amelia had disappeared, half expecting, half dreading to see her return. She never did. At the end of dinner, Sarah excused herself to use the restroom, leaving him alone at the table. Ethan seized the moment, calling over the nearest waiter. "Excuse me, could you tell me the name of the server who was attending this section earlier?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The waiter looked confused. "Amelia? I think her shift just ended." "I'm not sure, but she's been working here for a few months." The name confirmed what he already knew, but hearing someone else say it sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. Amelia was working there, and had been for months, while he hadn't even given a thought to how she was faring after the divorce. Now, with the information he had, Ethan couldn't ignore what he'd seen. The image of Amelia, pregnant and working in that place, burned itself into his mind as a constant reminder of something he hadn't faced. When Sarah returned to the table, Ethan had regained some of his composure, but his mind remained trapped in a torrent of thoughts. They left the restaurant together, and though Ethan tried to keep the conversation light, Sarah noticed his distraction. "Are you sure everything's okay?" she asked as they got into the car. "Yeah, just tired," he replied, avoiding her gaze. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully in her bed, Ethan lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Amelia's face, her swollen belly, and the way she had avoided his eyes wouldn't leave him alone. For the first time in months, he realized that the past he had tried so hard to leave behind was about to return with more force than he ever imagined. What hidden regrets truly haunt us, waiting for a moment of truth to shatter the illusion of a perfect new beginning. Ethan woke the next day with an unshakable feeling of unease. He'd spent hours tossing and turning, caught in a tangle of memories that time had failed to erase. As he sipped his coffee in the kitchen, with Sarah still asleep, his mind returned again and again to Amelia's image, working in that restaurant, visibly pregnant. There was something profoundly disturbing about seeing her like that, as if her unexpected appearance had reopened a wound he thought was long healed. He remembered the early years of his relationship with Amelia. They had been young, full of dreams and boundless hope. Amelia was a passionate woman, with an energy that lit up any room. She had supported him unconditionally as he built his business empire, sacrificing many of her own ambitions to be his rock. But over time, Ethan began to change. Work became his sole priority, and long nights at the office became the norm. Romantic dinners were replaced by business meetings, and shared weekends turned into hours glued to his phone and email. The distance between them didn't appear suddenly, but like a hairline crack that slowly widened. Amelia tried to talk to him, explaining how she felt ignored, how she needed his emotional support as much as he needed hers professionally. But Ethan always had an excuse. "It's for our future. I just need to close this deal. Soon we'll have more time." Each broken promise was another brick in the wall separating them. The memory of their last argument still haunted him. Amelia had cried, pleading with him to listen, to understand how much she was losing by focusing only on his career. Ethan, frustrated and exhausted, had coldly replied, "If this isn't enough for you, then maybe we should just end it." He hadn't expected her to take him seriously, but the next day, Amelia had packed her bags and left. It was then he understood he had lost her. Returning to the present, Ethan wondered how they had reached this point. Amelia, a woman who had once been his partner and confidant, was now just a shadow of the past he had tried to forget. But seeing her pregnant changed everything. Was that child his? So why hadn't she told him? And if not, who was the father? Guilt began to gnaw at him. He had dedicated the past months to building a new life with Sarah, someone who represented stability and simplicity. But now, he couldn't ignore that he had left a chapter of his life unfinished. He wondered if he had been selfish in taking for granted that Amelia would be fine after the divorce, in assuming she could move on as he had. Ethan knew he couldn't stand idly by. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things he needed to understand. Though a part of him feared confronting the past, another part knew he wouldn't find peace until he did. As he looked out the window, Amelia's face returned to his mind. And with it, a decision began to form. He needed to know the truth even if it hurt. Can a desperate heart find the courage to face a past it shattered, even when the truth promises to be devastating? Ethan couldn't get Amelia out of his head. Days turned into a week, but the image of his pregnant ex-wife, working as a waitress, haunted him relentlessly. At the office, as he reviewed contracts and attended meetings, his mind drifted back to the past, to what he'd left unresolved. At night, when Sarah tried to talk, he'd respond in monosyllables, distant. There was something about that unexpected encounter that had utterly destabilized him, a nagging sense of obligation he couldn't ignore. Finally, his gnawing curiosity overpowered his reluctance. He decided to go back to the restaurant where he'd seen her, this time alone. He said nothing to Sarah. He wasn't ready to explain the turmoil stirring within him. He arrived early, before the dinner rush, and asked for a table with a view of the entrance. Pretending to be engrossed in his phone, he kept his eyes fixed on the staff moving in and out of the kitchen. After a few tense minutes, he saw her. Amelia was there, carrying a tray with the same serene expression she'd always had, though now her eyes held a weariness Ethan didn't remember. Her pregnancy was undeniable. Even though her uniform tried to conceal it, her bulging belly spoke for itself. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't know how to approach her, what to say after so long. Yet, he knew he couldn't leave without answers. He waited patiently until Amelia approached a nearby table. Feigning casualness, he called out to her. "Amelia," he said in a soft but firm tone. She froze for a moment, as if she'd seen a ghost. Slowly, she turned towards him, her eyes reflecting a mix of surprise and discomfort. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice strained. "I wanted to see you," he replied, cutting straight to the chase. "We need to talk." Amelia looked at him with disbelief, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I'm working," she snapped, turning to walk away. But Ethan wasn't willing to let the conversation end like that. "Please," he insisted. "Just 5 minutes. Not here. After your shift. I promise it won't be more than that." Amelia stared at him, weighing his words. There was something in his expression that made her hesitate. Finally, she sighed as if reluctantly giving in. "I get off at 10, she said, before walking away to continue her work. The hours crawled by for Ethan as he waited in his car, parked across from the restaurant. When the clock struck 10, he saw Amelia emerge from the back door, wrapped in a light coat. He quickly approached her, his heart pounding. "Thanks for coming," he said sincerely. Amelia looked at him with a mix of exhaustion and resignation. "I don't know what you expect from this conversation, Ethan," she said, "but I don't have time for games. I just want answers," he responded. "I need to know how we got to this point, and if the baby is mine." His last phrase came out almost as a whisper, but it was enough to make Amelia's eyes harden. "Then you'd better listen closely," she said, crossing her arms, "because I'm not going to repeat myself. What happens when the truth you've spent years avoiding slams into your life, demanding not just recognition, but a commitment you never planned for?" Amelia stared at him intently, her expression a mix of exhaustion and steely resolve. Ethan, standing before her, felt the weight of her gaze. She wasn't the same woman he had known. There was something different about her, something time and circumstances had changed. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm as he waited for her to speak. "The baby is yours, Ethan," she finally stated, blunt and direct. Her voice was firm, as if she were tired of carrying the secret alone. "But don't expect that to mean anything more. I'm doing fine on my own, and I don't need anything from you." The impact of her words hit Ethan like a blast of icy air. He had considered the possibility, but hearing it directly from Amelia made the reality feel more tangible, more inescapable. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" His tone wasn't accusatory, but filled with confusion and a hint of pain. "We had a right to know, Amelia. I had a right to know." She laughed, but it wasn't a joyful sound. It was bitter, laden with frustration. "A right? What are you talking about, Ethan? When I needed you, you were never there. And now you think you have a right to something." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "I didn't come looking for you because I knew you couldn't give me anything but excuses. I made the decision to move forward without you, because that was best for me and for this baby." Ethan felt Amelia's words pierce through every layer of self-defense he had built. He knew she was right in a way. He had chosen his work, his ambition over her again and again. But the fact that she had made such a life-altering decision without including him made him feel even more isolated from what had once been his life. "Amelia, I know I made mistakes," he said, forcing himself to maintain a calm tone. "I know I failed as a husband, but this baby is different. He's my child too. I want to be a part of his life, even if it's late." She watched him in silence for a moment, as if evaluating the sincerity of his words. Finally, she sighed and looked away. I don't know if I can trust you, Ethan. Not after everything that happened. I've learned to manage on my own, and I don't want this baby to go through what I went through with you. Let me prove to you that I've changed, Ethan insisted. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I want to try. For the baby. For us. Even if we don't get back together. Amelia shook her head, still reluctant to yield. I don't know if I can believe you, she said softly. But I also can't deny my child the chance to know his father. However, Ethan, this doesn't mean I'm giving you a second chance. If you want to be involved, you'll have to earn it. Ethan nodded, accepting her challenge. He had a lot to prove both to Amelia and to himself. But at that moment, under the dim streetlights, he felt that perhaps this was the beginning of something new, something he couldn't afford to ruin. What happens when the truth you've finally embraced forces you to dismantle the very life you meticulously built, leaving a trail of shattered expectations? The next day, Ethan returned home, his mind a whirlwind. The conversation with Amelia still echoed in his head, every word laden with reproaches and uncomfortable truths. He knew she was right. He had failed her as a husband, and now he had to prove he wouldn't make the same mistakes as a father. But as he tried to process everything, he also knew there was something else he had to face. Sarah. Sarah greeted him with her usual warm smile, preparing coffee in the kitchen, oblivious to the thoughts tormenting Ethan. You're home early today, she commented softly, pouring the liquid into 2 mugs. How was your day? Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. He'd been avoiding this conversation, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth from her much longer. Sarah wasn't foolish, and his growing distraction hadn't gone unnoticed. We need to talk, he finally said, his voice serious. Sarah put the mug down on the counter, turning to look at him. Her smile vanished as she saw the expression on Ethan's face. What's wrong? She asked, worried. He took a breath, trying to gather his thoughts. Yesterday, when we were at the restaurant, I saw someone, Amelia. The mention of his ex-wife made Sarah frown. She knew about the divorce, but Ethan had rarely spoken of Amelia, as if she were a closed and filed chapter in his life. And? She asked cautiously. She was working there and she's pregnant. Ethan continued, his voice strained. Sarah, the baby is mine. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sarah stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and confusion. She seemed to process his words slowly, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Are you saying your ex-wife is pregnant? With your child? And you're just finding out now? Yes, Ethan replied, feeling the full weight of the situation. She told me last night. I had no idea, Sarah. I didn't know anything until I saw her. Sarah took a step back, crossing her arms over her chest. She had spent months building a relationship with Ethan, trusting that he had left his past behind. Now everything she thought she knew about him was crumbling. And what does this mean for us? She asked, her voice heavy with emotion. What are you going to do now? I want to be part of my son's life, Ethan said firmly. I can't ignore this, Sarah. It's my responsibility. She looked at him with a mix of disappointment and pain. And what about us? Where do I fit into all of this? Or does everything now revolve around Amelia and that baby? Sarah, this has nothing to do with how I feel about you, he tried to explain. But I can't turn my back on my child. I hope you can understand that. Sarah shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know if I can, Ethan. I don't know if I can be a part of this. Sarah paused, her gaze reflecting an internal struggle. I need time to think. This isn't what I expected from our relationship. Without waiting for his response, she left the room, leaving Ethan alone with his growing sense of loss. He knew his decision would have consequences, but he never imagined they could cost him so much. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the door through which Sarah had exited. The house, which normally felt warm and welcoming, now seemed cold and silent. Sarah's reaction had been a blow he wasn't prepared for, but he couldn't blame her either. He himself could barely process everything that was happening, and he knew it wouldn't be easy for her to accept the implications of his decision. The next day, as he drove to the office, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he was making the right choices. On one hand, his responsibility to Amelia and the baby was undeniable. It was his child, and he couldn't allow himself to be the absent father he had always feared becoming. But on the other hand, there was Sarah, the woman with whom he had begun to build a new life, a life that now seemed in danger of falling apart. During a break in his workday, Ethan locked himself in his office and allowed himself a moment to reflect. He pulled out his phone and, almost without thinking, dialed Amelia's number. The call was brief. He wanted to make sure they could talk later, at a time when both of them would be calmer. Amelia agreed, though with a hint of wariness in her voice. That night, Ethan returned to the restaurant where Amelia worked, this time determined to speak with her more clearly. Amelia met him outside the establishment, with the same tired expression she'd worn since their first encounter. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, crossing her arms as if preparing for a confrontation. "I don't want to fight," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I just want to talk about the baby, about how we can handle this together." Amelia sighed and nodded, though her stance remained defensive. "All right, talk." Ethan took a deep breath before beginning. "I know I failed you before, Amelia. I know I stopped being the man you needed, and I'm sorry. But this baby is my chance to make it right, to prove that I can be a better man, a better father. I don't want you to do this alone." She looked at him for a long moment, evaluating his words. Finally, she spoke. "And how do you plan to do that, Ethan? Because it's not just about saying you want to help. It's about being there, being consistent, not disappearing when things get tough. I'm not going to put this baby in an unstable situation." "I know," he replied with a sincerity that seemed to surprise her. "And I want to show you that I'm committed. I'm not asking you to trust me immediately, but give me the chance to earn your trust." Amelia watched him, still hesitating, but something in Ethan's determination seemed different. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but this doesn't change anything between us, Ethan. My priority is this baby. If you really want to be involved, you'll have to prove it." As Ethan drove home that night, he felt a mix of relief and anxiety. He had taken an important step, but he knew the hardest part was yet to come. He would have to balance his responsibilities with Amelia and the baby while trying to save what was left of his relationship with Sarah. His life, once so perfectly controlled, was now a chaos he had to face with determination. What unspoken vows can be broken and new commitments forged when a man chooses to face his past and embrace a future he never envisioned? The days that followed were thick with tension. Ethan, accustomed to having control over every aspect of his life, now felt like he was walking a tightrope. On one hand, there was the commitment he'd made to Amelia and the baby. On the other, his relationship with Sarah seemed to crumble further with each conversation. She had grown distant, spending more time out of the house and limiting any meaningful exchanges to the bare minimum. Ethan knew he had to confront that situation, but every time he tried to talk to her, the conversations ended in tense arguments. Sarah was hurt, and Ethan understood why. But despite everything, his priority remained Amelia and the baby. Ethan decided to focus on what he could do. He knew he wouldn't win Amelia's trust with words alone, so he set out to show her he was serious. One afternoon, after finishing work, he stopped by a baby store. He had no idea what he was looking for, but he walked the aisles with determined purpose. After a quick call to his assistant for advice, he ended up buying a crib, clothes, diapers, and a few toys. That night, he loaded his car with the packages and drove to Amelia's small apartment. As he climbed the stairs, bags in hand, he felt a strange nervousness, like he was about to face a crucial job interview. He knocked on the door and waited. Amelia opened it with an expression of surprise that quickly turned to caution when she saw Ethan laden with packages. "What are you doing?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I brought some things for the baby," he replied, showing her the bags. "I know it's still a while off, but I thought maybe we could start getting ready. I want to help, Amelia." She looked at him for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity, trying to decipher his intentions. Finally, She stepped aside to let him in. Ethan placed the bags in a corner of the small living room and looked around. The place was modest but clean and welcoming. There were clear signs that Amelia was doing her best with what she had. "It's a lot," she finally said, looking at the bags with a mix of gratitude and distrust. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Ethan responded sincerely, "but I want to. I can't change what happened between us, Amelia, but I can be here now for you and for the baby." Amelia sighed and sank onto the sofa, her gaze softening slightly. "This doesn't change anything, Ethan. It doesn't mean I fully trust you, but thank you. This will help a lot." Ethan nodded, accepting her response without trying to force anything more. He knew earning her trust would be a slow process, and he was willing to wait. A few minutes passed in uncomfortable silence before Ethan decided to leave. "If you need anything at all, call me. No matter the time." Amelia walked him to the door. Before he left, she looked at him with a faint smile. "Thank you, Ethan. Really." As he drove back home, Ethan felt a spark of hope. There was a lot to repair, but at least he had taken the first step. Though his life was still chaotic, that night he allowed himself to believe he was on the right path. Ethan began to get more involved in Amelia's life and the preparations for the baby's arrival. Although she maintained a certain emotional distance, she didn't refuse his help. He spent several afternoons with her, assembling the crib he had bought, organizing the tiny baby clothes, and making sure she lacked nothing. Every gesture, every shared moment, was Ethan's attempt to prove that this time he was truly committed. However, his relationship with Sarah continued to deteriorate. She barely spoke to him and spent nights away, staying at a friend's house. Ethan knew he had to face that situation, but every time he tried to talk to her, the conversations ended in tense arguments. Sarah was hurt, and Ethan understood why. But, despite everything, his priority remained Amelia and the baby. One afternoon, while helping Amelia organize the last details in the apartment, she watched him silently from the sofa. Ethan, focused on installing a small mobile above the crib, didn't notice Amelia's gaze at first. When he finished, he turned to her and saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. A mix of gratitude and perhaps a hint of respect. "You've changed," Amelia said suddenly, breaking the silence. Ethan was surprised by her words. "You think so?" he asked, with a small flicker of hope in his voice. Amelia nodded, crossing her arms. "I don't know if you're the same man I married, but I do know that this Ethan is trying, and that means a lot." He sat beside her, taking a moment to absorb what she had just said. "I want you to know that I truly regret what happened before. I can't change what I did, but I'm here now, and I won't fail you again." Amelia didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be wrestling with her own thoughts, her own fears. Finally, she spoke softly. "I don't expect everything to be perfect. I just hope you're consistent. This baby deserves that, and so do I." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of those words. He knew he still had a lot to prove, but for the first time in months, he felt he was beginning to rebuild something with Amelia, even if it wasn't a romantic relationship. That same night, back at his house, Ethan found Sarah waiting for him in the living room. Her expression was cold and resolute, as if she had made a decision she could no longer postpone. "We need to talk," she said, crossing her arms. Ethan sighed and sat across from her. He knew what was coming, and though it hurt, he also knew he couldn't stop it. "I can't go on like this," Sarah said, her voice firm but laden with emotion. "I'm not the woman who can accept being a second priority in your life. You need to focus on your child and Amelia, and I need something different." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I understand, Sarah, and I'm sorry I put you in this position." She looked at him one last time, with a mix of sadness and resignation. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Ethan. Take care of that baby." When Sarah left, Ethan was left alone, with an emptiness in his chest, but also with a clarity he hadn't possessed before. He knew that even though he had lost Sarah, he was doing the right thing by prioritizing his child and Amelia. It was the price he had to pay for his past mistakes, but he was willing to face it. For the first time in a long time, he felt he was moving in the right direction. Can the arrival of a new life heal old wounds, offering a chance for redemption and a family built on unexpected foundations? The day arrived sooner than expected. Ethan was in his office, reviewing documents when his phone rang. Looking at the screen, he saw Amelia's name. A knot tightened in his stomach as he answered. "Ethan?" she said, her voice strained. "It's the baby. I'm at the hospital." The words hit him like a lightning bolt. Without wasting a second, Ethan dropped everything and rushed out. During the frantic drive to the hospital, his mind raced, a blur of anxiety, excitement, and fear. He hadn't imagined the moment would come so soon, but he knew he had to be there, that he had to prove his commitment was real. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Amelia in a bed, her face pale but serene. She was accompanied by a nurse who was adjusting the monitors around her. Ethan approached slowly, his heart pounding. "How are you?" he asked, gently taking her hand. "I'm fine," Amelia replied with a weak smile. "I think he's just eager to meet you." They both chuckled softly, though Ethan could feel the tension in the air. For the next few hours, he stayed by her side, making sure she had everything she needed. The wait was long and exhausting, but Ethan didn't move for a moment. He was determined to be there for her and for his child. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctors entered the room and began the delivery process. Ethan held Amelia's hand tightly, offering words of encouragement as she struggled through each contraction. He had never felt something so intense, so real. It was a moment that would change him forever. The baby's cry filled the room, and Ethan felt his entire world stop. When the doctor placed the newborn in Amelia's arms, Ethan couldn't stop the tears from rolling down his face. It was a boy, perfect and fragile, barely covered by a small blanket. "He's beautiful," Ethan whispered, looking at the baby in awe. "He's our son." Amelia looked at him with an expression of exhaustion but also profound satisfaction. "Yes, he is." The next few minutes were a blur of emotions. Ethan took the baby in his arms, feeling an immediate connection he had never experienced before. In that instant, everything else ceased to matter. The mistakes of the past, the doubts, the fears. There was only him, Amelia, and that tiny being who had just arrived in the world. Later, as Amelia rested in her bed, Ethan sat beside her, holding the baby. "I promise I'm going to be here for you too," he said firmly. "I won't fail you." Amelia, though tired, looked at him with a faint smile. "I hope so, Ethan, for this little one's sake." That night, Ethan felt as if a new door had opened in his life. He had lost many things, but he had also gained something invaluable. The chance to be better, to build something real and lasting, and he wasn't going to waste it. Part 8. The Unconventional Family. What does it mean to truly win in life? Is it material success, or the courage to embrace an imperfect path to profound connection and a family built on resilience? Months after the baby's birth, Ethan's life had changed in ways he never imagined. His routine, once dominated by long work hours and endless meetings, now revolved around diapers, bottles, and his son's small but significant milestones. Though the path hadn't been easy, every sacrifice was worth it when he saw his child smile or held his tiny hand in his own. Amelia, for her part, had begun to see Ethan in a new light. Although she maintained a certain emotional distance, she couldn't ignore the genuine effort he was making. He was there for every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night, and every small moment that required patience and dedication. Sometimes, she would watch him playing with the baby and wonder if this Ethan had always been there, hidden beneath the excessive ambition that had once separated them. One afternoon, while they were at the park, Ethan pushed the stroller as Amelia walked beside him. It was a sunny day, and the baby slept peacefully under the shade of a tree. Ethan broke the silence. "You know," he said, his gaze fixed on the path, "I never thought my life would take this turn, but now I can't imagine anything different." Amelia glanced at him, evaluating the sincerity in his voice. "You've changed, Ethan. I see it in the way you care for our son." But don't forget you're still building this. Trust isn't regained overnight. I know, he replied with a slight nod. And I'm willing to keep working at it, not just for him, but for you too. I want you to know I'm here for whatever you need. Amelia smiled, a small but genuine smile. You're doing well, Ethan. Better than I expected. Over time, the dynamic between them began to soften. Although they didn't become a couple again, they managed to find a balance that allowed them to co-parent and, in a sense, be friends. Ethan made an effort to be consistent, demonstrating with actions what words alone couldn't repair. One day, while they were playing with the baby in Amelia's living room, the little one, who was already starting to babble, held out his arms to Ethan. "Papa," he said with a mischievous smile. Ethan felt a lump in his throat, his heart pounding. It was the first time he had heard that word from his son's lips. Amelia looked at him, and in her eyes was a mix of emotions. Pride, tenderness, and a spark of hope. "I think he likes you," she said with a smile. "I hope he always does," Ethan replied, taking the baby in his arms. "I promise I'll never fail him." The family that had once been fragmented was now finding its own way. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for Ethan, that was enough. He had learned that true success wasn't in his career or his bank account, but in the connections he built with the people who mattered most. And this time, he wasn't going to let it go. Call to action and final thoughts. The unexpected path to belonging. Friends, did this story of transformation and redemption move you? Every decision we make can change not only our lives, but also those of the people we love most. If Ethan's journey towards fatherhood and reconciliation touched you, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends so they can also reflect on the power of change and the importance of family relationships. Moreover, if you enjoy stories filled with emotion and inspiring messages, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. We want to hear more from you. Where are you watching us from? Write in the comments. We'd love to read your thoughts and connect with you.